Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to today's session. I'm delighted to welcome you to the final session of day 3. I'll be your chair today. I'm so excited to welcome you all. Please let us know in the chat box where you're from so we can connect together and grow even further as part of this amazing LT community. Before we get started today, I thought it would be really nice to reflect on the 3 earlier sessions and whether that be focusing on streamlining communication, for optimal knowledge retention, building AI fluency, or harnessing the power of adaptive learning. Before I welcome our guests today, I know this session is going to be, definitely fundamental and additive to the earlier 3 sessions. So I would like to welcome our presenter, Laurie, today. Hi, Laurie.
Hello, Annie. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Just to let you know, I'm sure you know much about Laurie's experience, but Laurie has a wealth of experience, I think 20 plus years, even though she looks incredibly young. Within the L&D industry across many areas. So I know she's going to bring extreme value to today's session. I also know she's got many areas of expertise, one being digital learning. So I won't take any more of everyone's valuable time and sit back, relax and enjoy this engaging session. So over to you, Laurie.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you everyone too for taking your valuable time to join this session. I know how much it means to take an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 to join these types of sessions. But I think now more than ever, it's very critical for us to be looking towards the future and asking some serious questions of ourselves. So today I have a really impressive background, as you can see. My apologies, I'm actually in a hotel room in Paris, but if you can tell from my accent, I'm not from the UK or this side of the pond, certainly not from Paris. I live in Toronto, Canada, but I'm here for the Unleash conference. So if those of you who are not familiar, it's the largest HR people tech conference that happens in Europe. And it's been interesting. I've spent today walking around the floor and talking to people, and there's a different mood. There's certainly a lot of excitement. There's a lot of new tech coming out, and people are, obviously talking about AI. That would be ridiculous if we were not. But there's also a bit of trepidation about what will the new future look like. There's a lot of questions that people are asking themselves and each other, and they'll see these new pieces of technology and say, well, that's great, but what does this actually mean for me? And if I'm an L&D professional, or I'm a chief learning officer, director of L&D in a company, what does that actually mean that I do? Where does my role go? Is it just automated, or am I still building courses? Because we're going to talk a little bit about, what do courses do in the future. We're also asking questions about just existential crisis in a way. What is learning? Can learning really be trusted by the robots? Or is human always need to be there? So there's a lot of things happening here. And I wanted to start with a little bit of a mood. And I think we have the poll question. So what I wanted to start with, I'm going to be very, very honest. I'm a woman of a certain age. So my musical references, I hope that I selected for the option here would be on point. But I wanted to ask you, just to get a feeling, which song best describes your emotion about the state of the L&D industry right now? And I'm going to be calling on Anit to give us some of those responses that are coming in. And if you think about a song that actually isn't on the list, and I also always love adding to my Spotify, so please do, if there's a song on there that you think should be added that describes what you think about the state of the L&D industry right now, I would absolutely love to hear it. So if we could see the results, Anit. I'll do an interpretive dance while we wait for those. Okay, so we have here, let me see, we've got Shake It Off by Taylor Swift, 6%. Wake Me Up by Avicii, yes, 41%. Actually, that was one of the largest ones. That actually looks like that was the main one. It's still moving a little bit. Taylor, we also got 18%. What Was I Made For by Billie Eilish, which is a bit of an existential feeling, right? What was I made for? And my favorite, okay, that was where my vote was Fix You by Coldplay. Please, if you can think of any other songs that maybe surround how you're feeling about the way that L&D is right now, please do just add them on. So let's take a moment to look back so that we can actually understand the future and where we're going. So this was what we had as Learner Experience 1.0. I could have gone further back, but I really didn't want to show my age. I even remember old systems where we had a CD-ROM or a black screen with green text. Didn't want to scare everyone. No one needs to go back that far. But if we think what we have here is, this is pretty indicative of what learners are seeing right now. They're seeing probably a number of squares on their screen, or at least a list of courses, some recommendations. They're probably seeing some data and metrics if you're on the other side of as the administrator. This is I mean, I just picked these random. I'm not picking on any vendor other than just to say this is probably pretty much on spot on with what we have right now. But think about, what is the learning experience today? Well, or where it's going is really, it looks like this. It's a cursor on a line, and it's looking for a prompt. And this has become a very big transformation. And the question that I just want you to reflect on too for yourself is, how many times do we even use Google, or how often are you going to your favorite LLM, be it Claude or ChatGPT, whatever, or Gemini, whatever you're using as your interface? This is now how information comes. It's not a crowded screen. It is blank. It is there for you to choose your own adventure and direct yourself and be responded to, and in natural language. But what does that mean for us? If we think of the construct of an L&D department, well, if you think of us like a store, for example, what is the thing that we sell primarily? We sell courses, different shapes of courses. We may have online courses, similar to what we're doing right now, e-courses, e-learning courses, click next to continue. We may have classroom courses. That's now starting to shift and change. And we're now moving into a point where I ask, is the course an old construct, the static course? So I'm going to reframe that. What I mean by that is the static course, in that the same course that everybody takes, that's in a SCORM package that launches from the LMS. Is that something that we're even going to have in the future as we move forward? And I think that this is a question we need to grapple with. It's an uncomfortable one, because if we think of our store, that's what we serve up. But there's a change happening. And the change is, when you prompt, you're getting, maybe it's generating a whole new course for you, or it's drip feeding you elements of learning to it so it can upskill you. So we have to think of the fate of this. So in this vein, the next question that I would ask you is, if e-learning courses were a patient, what would their status be? Is this something that we are going to be able to put? So the poll question should come up now. Are these questions that we will be able to, shock and get it, back to life? Or are they, not? Are they dead on arrival? I hate saying that. They need to go to the morgue. So the ones that I have here that I see, thank you so much, Anit. We've got on life support. We've got, I think, 23%. All right, so they're not gone yet. 50% are undergoing surgery. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it. They're going to get some changes. They're going to have a little nip and tuck. And 20% are rehabilitation. So they're going through some physiotherapy, and 7% alive and well. And there are going to be elements that are alive and well. So it's interesting to see how people's views are changing, because I think if you reflect yourself, if I'd asked that question maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there might have been something different. Mike says, do not resuscitate. Yes. I apologize. I use a lot of medical references, and then I realized during COVID those really didn't perform well. But I find it's an interesting universal way for people to understand things. But yes, maybe we do have a do not resuscitate happening there. But this is what's happening with the course. And the thing is when we start, if you think back to November 2022, so that was when there was the first drop of OpenAI's ChatGPT, if you can believe it, and we're in 2025 now. That was when it first dropped. And at the time, there were a lot of companies that were saying we could produce courses for you. And what this reminded me of is, and I'm going to show you a slide here. This is the Lion of Gripsholm. So the Lion of Gripsholm, you'll see it's a very unusual looking lion, but there's a story behind it. So what happened to this lion is it was gifted, at one point it was a living lion, and it was gifted to a king of Sweden in the 1700s rather. And the lion lived a life, and then it passed away. And when it passed away, it was given to a taxidermist. And the taxidermist had never seen a lion in real life. It'd seen drawings of lions, and I'll show you what one of those drawings looked like. But because they'd never seen a lion, they looked at this carcass and went, well, what am I going to do? And how am I going to recreate a lion? And this is what the taxidermist created. And the reason why I bring this up is that it reminds me a lot of how AI generates course content now. It's got the outlines and ideas of what a good course looks like, but it really also depends on the data and how things are pieced together. And for this poor taxidermist who'd never seen a lion, this was probably, historians look back and say this was probably the image of a lion that it saw on flags. It'd not seen a real one. And that explains that weird tongue kind of going out. Because if I'll go back to, if you see that tongue's kind of this weird thing, they believe that this is probably where that came from. So we're in this approximation, like it will produce a course, especially if you give it good prompts. But the question is it really a course, and how effective is it? As Daisy said, exactly, she's completely encapsulated it. This is like a bad AI version of a lion. Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Poor lion. And a question that we have here from Wessel: if you ask this philosophical question, will e-learning be even in the future? Look at Notebook LM from Google. And that's true. That is actually, you've beat me to my next slide, that this is actually part of some of the new tech that we're seeing. I really, really loved that a newsletter that I follow actually stopped producing the typical newsletter that you scan and read. Instead, it provided a Notebook LM. It curated a number of articles, some that they had written, resources, videos, put it into a Notebook LM, and then it highlighted a few key prompts for you that they felt you should have a look at. But otherwise, you could interact with it, query it, put it into a podcast as you saw fit. And I thought, wow, that's very, very different to just getting a standard newsletter to keep up to date. But we're seeing other things that happen as well. Copilot, and we're going to look in detail in a moment, how Copilot is starting to turn into that coach. We also do see more customized GPTs, so and AI assistants and coaches. There's a lot of different words to describe what's actually happening there. But it's that white bar that you interact with and that answers you and is providing a learning experience that's personalized to you. Now, the degree of personalization and whatnot, we'll talk about. Right? So a few things happened actually in just last week. This was a really, really big one. And I think it's one that L&D does need to pay attention to. So the first one was outside of corporate L&D. And this was GetAbstract and Copilot announced a partnership. So this means that as a Copilot user if your company has a license, and a lot of companies, enterprise companies at least, are running on Microsoft, you can go into Copilot, and if you are asking a question about a particular topic and it is found in GetAbstract, it will actually ingest that content, extract it from GetAbstract, and provide it to you in natural language back to answer your question, just like if you were using any other LLM. And it will be seamless to you. You won't even have to ask, please look at GetAbstract. It just automatically will pull if it is relevant. And it will also give you the page or where the source for where you could get that for GetAbstract. So it's very similar, akin to if you were using Perplexity, if you've used that ever as an LLM, and it gives you the actual link and the source. Well, now kind of all of them do, but Perplexity really, I think, does it in an overt way, is what you'll see with Get Abstract. So that happened within the corporate one. But then this is where it gets interesting. In the public one, and by public, I mean out in the wild, Coursera and OpenAI announced a partnership. And this means that you can plug in Coursera content into OpenAI, not because you're going to view one of their courses to click next to continue, but rather it's going to unlock the knowledge and the content that is within Coursera if a relevant question comes up. And it's going to interact with you as if it's a tutor with explanations, quizzes, talk to you. You can say, like, use the Socratic method and help me master this. So all of a sudden you see how that course is now becoming something that's fluid, that is not something rigid, and we're unlocking the content from that. And that's a whole other topic that I love to talk about, which is unlocking SCORM. What could we do with it? Because SCORM is something that it can't often be scraped, and that's exactly what Coursera and OpenAI with that partnership are now playing with. Is that content doesn't need to be locked in that click next to continue. See a couple questions come up. I just want to make sure I address them. Lindsay has just started to use Copilot as the business has introduced it. Wonderful. Play with it. I would highly recommend using it as playfully as possible, just to get a feel of that. Ben, Copilot is good for small changes, code analysis. It's not great for AI generation. There definitely are better models, and this is a thing that's happening as well. You really have to pick and choose what tool you're going to use. If you want video, you're probably going to use Sora, for example. But I think that's going to start to shift. Because I believe, like, for example, now when you use ChatGPT, it will actually choose the model, be it Mini 4.0, whatever it is, depending on the question. So it has that agility. So you don't need to constantly select which version or which LLM you'll have. I predict that with Copilot, for example, it will just automatically switch to tutor mode when it recognizes that you are looking for that coaching or that teaching. We'll see how that happens. We do have a question from Nigel, though. Given the imminent death of e-learning, we're still on standby. We're getting a nip tuck, maybe. In your experience, what can technology, and specifically AI, do to inspire, prompt, prepare, guide, enable better human connection, collective learning in the limited times that people are physically together? That's a really interesting question. And as I go through, I'm going to be answering parts of this. People are very afraid of losing this human connection, and we should be. But I'm also seeing that it doesn't go away. It just goes into a different mode. And you'd be surprised also, too, at how much people are using AI for a pseudo-human connection, which is maybe disturbing right now, but it's also something we need to grapple with. I will, as I said, go further on this answer. But one thing I will say is I don't know of any company that is completely getting rid of face-to-face or virtual sessions. It's just not happening. Those virtual sessions are important. They're just being used for different topics and for different purposes, which I think is critical. So what do we do as a learning experience designer? What happens to us if we're not making courses, if we are not building a better mousetrap? What happens to us? And what I predict is this will be the learning experience architect. And if you've ever seen Wicked or The Wizard of Oz, for those of you who are closer to my age, there's a wizard behind the curtain, and the wizard flips levers and makes things happen within the environment to influence change. And this is what I predict, or I feel, will be the next iteration. It'll be a learning experience architect. You may also hear in adjacent industries, I used architect. Some people say orchestrator. In marketing, for example, they use the word orchestrator quite a bit. So consider it a synonym. But I happen to use the word architect before I caught on to when people were using the term orchestrator. But what it really is looking at this triangulation of experience and learning experiences and when they should be leveraged. So you've got context in the center, you've got application, data, and then content at the top. It's not content in the center. I'm looking for context in the center. So this is what I perceive is going to become the model for how L&D makes things happen within the world. Just have a reflection from Edwin before I really look at deep dive into what a learning experience architect is. But it says, we seem to be moving from having the skill of creating content to the skill of being able to build context from content. Absolutely. And we also will be doing something that I call triggers. What do I mean by a trigger? This is probably a overly simple example, but because I'm introducing it, I wanted to show you the steps of it. So say we are an organization where we do need more of our employees to have a working knowledge of Spanish. So an employee has taken a course, and maybe they've been on Babbel or Duolingo, whatever they're taking, and they've completed level 4. And we've decided we've determined, not decided, as learning experience architects, that level 4 is a good level for them to have another challenge. And we create a trigger. So the trigger is from the LMS, you complete level 4, then the next time they log into Excel or any other program, it says, hey, would you like to build more of your Spanish skills by changing your language settings to Spanish? I would say that in Spanish, but I can't. But that's probably what it would say. And the person can have that opportunity to do that or not. And if they do, that trigger then is looking at how that person is improving in Spanish. And if they're improving at a good practice, there may be a point where the learning experience architect has designed another trigger, where that meant that information is sent to a talent marketplace. And that employee now has an opportunity to speak more Spanish with a project perhaps that is, based out of South America or Colombia. So it's this idea of thinking of what I call seed to fruit, and the steps that would be involved that aren't just content. It's not just consuming content. It's not even just getting coaching, but it's that whole nurturing through the entire ecosystem. So if we go back to what we have here and the context is really the lever, the trigger that makes all of the other things. It makes everything. The three other things make the context rather happen. So it's the data, the content, and the application. So we start putting these pieces together. And you may say, well, okay, if I just have a learning management system, how am I actually doing this? And this is the interesting change that's coming, because now when we have new technology like agents and MCPs, and don't worry, I'm not going to do a deep dive on MCPs, but we have some more possibilities, especially when we're operating in an ecosystem. So the ecosystem here is, I've tried to sort of map out some of the things that you are going to start to see within your ecosystem. We sit firmly in the LMS, but there are other places. We're going to have the HR platform, skills platform, perhaps, talent marketplace, social learning, collaborative tools. So to Nigel's question above, there is that human to human connection, albeit it is virtual, but it is still a human. It's not an AI that you are interacting with, and maybe a skills taxonomy. So it's this idea that this is now where those triggers are going to be designed within those ecosystems to map how learning is going to happen and flow throughout them. Vivi says, hi, Vivi. I believe you're in Finland. L&D is finally moving towards performance support, enabling a workforce who are task capable anytime. Exactly. That's really what we're doing. And what it also comes down to is, with those triggers that we design as the architect, we also need to think of how we do personalization and hyper-personalization. That will be up to us to design. Even the campaigns or triggers, that's not just magically going to be done by AI. We can ask it for advice, but we will be needing to think very long and hard about how that's going to operate in a system. Same with personalization. We're going to need to be thinking about, what do we personalize? Where do we get that data from? Is it going to be, we know that where they work, who their manager is, do we know their calendar and when their lunch hour is? All sorts of things. We will need to think about that, but we also need to understand that hyper-personalization is really I like to say it's like the accelerant, the match on gasoline or on petrol, because it's what puts it on fire, because that's what makes it really contextualized to a person, right? It's understanding all of those things around them, which is extremely important. Okay. So the next question, I believe I had this as a poll, and I'm going to just defer to Anit and Andrew. Did I ask this as a poll question? What is the number? Oh, it comes up anyway. Forget about it. What is the number one AI skill L&D professionals should learn? Agents and agentic AI. And now here should come up my question. I'm going to ask you, what is your experience with agents? Is it something you've come across? Is it something that you're really, really tired of hearing about? Is it something that you're interested in, but it seems way out there? Or my favorite, 10%, James Bond, License to Skill. For those of you who don't know me well, I do love a good pun, and I had to also say James Bond. But I'd like to give you a moment because I don't think we have all the answers in. But if we can have a moment to go through nothing yet. So some of you may have not heard what agents are. Some of you've known about them, but you've really not tried building one, which is actually something I'm going to set as a little challenge in a handout for you. No worry, not in this session. And who is building agents into the workflow? Are you actually maybe working with Power Automate or N8N or Zapier? And don't worry about those names. Those will all be on a handout for you at the end. So you'll have a chance to look at those. And then, as I said, agents, to you, an agent is James Bond, License to Skill. And I'll just wait here for a moment for Andrew and Anit to see what the final ones have come up as. All right, so we've got 25%, nothing yet. You're not alone. 47%, almost half. I know about building them. Perfect. And then we have 20%, you're building agents into your workflow. Interesting. And 8%, James Bond, License to Skill. I love that. Who doesn't love 007? So for those of you who maybe aren't too familiar with agents, or for those of you who are maybe building some, I will do a little overview of it, but don't worry, you will get this on a handout. But agents are really, the way to kind of think about them is they're very simple interns or employees that can do a very specific thing. So an agent, it's something that could take data and it could make a decision or do something on your behalf. So you might say, an agent in your real life, you might say, I want to fly to Tahiti. Agent, when you find a airline price from these airlines that flies on these days at this price, I don't want to pay more than this price, book it for me. That could be done. That would be an agent doing that for you. Okay. So they can perform these tasks rather than you sitting and hitting refresh, going to all the websites. An agent could do that. I don't know if I trust my credit card to an agent right now, but if you use Comet, the browser by Perplexity, these things are possible. Agentic AI is broader. So it's about multiple AI agents doing different things and working together. And you may even set up a manager agent that is looking after the sub-agents, but it's orchestrating different workflows within your organization. So this is kind of a way to think about it. So they're basically little robots that do things, but they get more sophisticated than that. And you may be saying, okay, so automation, all right, that would be great. Somebody could automatically pull a report from my LMS on a certain day or do, things like that. Well, so what? What does it mean for me in L&D, especially if I'm a learning experience architect? Well, there's some really savvy ways that we actually can use agents. And there's two primary ones that I'm fascinated with. There are many, many more, but there's two that I get very interested in. One is the automated virtuous cycle, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And the other one is a self-healing course. Danny Johnson uses the term self-healing course. I use virtuous cycle. We kind of mean similar, but also a little bit of different things. So I'll explain both of them. And please, if you have any questions or even feedback, I'm unable to see the chat myself, but I do have Anit and Andrew who are monitoring it for me. So faster, slower questions, please do add those in because I do love the interaction, and it helps me make sure that I'm giving you what you need, because I know your time is valuable. So if we're thinking about the virtuous cycle or self-healing courses, we have to do a little bit of storytelling here. So originally, we had a linear plan, okay, where we had the annual plan, and then it went across over time, and we would measure our Kirkpatrick level 1 to 4 if we ever got to 4. And if you ever got to a Kirkpatrick level 4, which is actually measuring impact into the business, this is how it would run. But it would be essentially, you'd launch the course, then you have this amount of time, and then we would have a finite a picture of where we got to, what changed. Could people pass the test, level 1? Did they feel confidence with the course? That's level 1. Now I'm being tested on my Kirkpatrick. Level 2, could they pass the test, etc. Okay, so these were what we had before. Then as we started to get more data ready, we had, selfishly, I called it data-driven learning design, which coincidentally is a term that never took off. But anyway, I started writing about that, where we were starting to get more data at the beginning, and we could start looking at an aggregate measurement, meaning we could make predictions better on what learning would do really, really well, because we would see what learning performed well in the past. And again, go back in time. This is pre-AI. So we could also, even just look at, some basics. If we had a video, did that perform well? And that, trust me, I'm not talking about learning styles, not at all, but the video, depending on how it was titled, where it was hosted, could people access it? It gave us a lot of data, whether that was a viable form, how long, or what topic. There's a lot of things that go into this, but we could work with that. But now we're in a space where we can do this. And I'll pull up this slide here, which is a real-time impact iterative model. So if we think of what I call the virtuous cycle, it means that if we get this right as learning architects, experienced architects, and this will take time, but we will start to be able to analyze data points within our organization as people go through learning to understand what actually works and what doesn't work. And if we design that correctly, the agent will learn and machine learn what actually works and constantly iterate and redesign. So for the next time that somebody goes through it, or it will understand certain patterns and behaviors and feed back to those when a person asks a particular question or requires certain guidance, or we can identify probably points of failure if somebody is our common points of failure and how we mitigate that. So if we think of that course as that malleable thing that stretches and extends and maybe squishes up, depending on the person using it, that's all done by that iterative model. So that's what I refer to as virtuous cycle, because it means that the content or the learning experience should ideally be consistently improving, in theory. The other one, which is fascinating, is the self-healing course. So now we can actually look at a course, and if there are direct things like, for example, in your LMS, you see that a question is consistently not being answered correctly, an agent can flag that with human in the loop, you go back and you fix it. Or another version of the self-healing course is you can set up a course and say, this is a product spec about bananas. I've got bananas in my hotel room. You might say, okay, anytime we change the location from where we imported bananas, please, agent, go in, update the file, and just say bananas are now from Costa Rica instead of coming from Brazil, okay? And that's a human in the loop would mean that they just okay that, or it just becomes an automated process that once you trust the agent, it starts doing those things. But again, AI, you can't just say AI will do it. It comes back to that learning experience architect. Our role is going to be to design these types of processes and to think hard about them. Takia says, and your experience is not alone. I created a basic agent, but required a lot of time and dedication. Yes, it does. And I don't ever expect that L&D is going to become agentic AI experts. But we do need to know enough about how they operate and what their purpose is, because that orchestration layer is going to be more and more critical to how our invisible LMSs, or some people say headless LMSs, operate. Because again, we're just interacting with that white box the prompt. That's how we're interacting with that person, that learner. All these things will be happening behind the scenes. And if it helps, if you feel any better, Takia, I built a AI agent that overnight would read my emails, because I'm in Toronto, so 6 hours time difference, and it would draft responses to me. I called it Sven. Sven had a meltdown very recently, and I thought I trained him really, really well. I've got to go back to the drawing board. So agents can be finicky. They can be hard, not necessarily everything that you want, but they're starting. So it's something to think about, the capabilities, because these are going to be really the engine that a modern learning and development department operates upon. Edwin has an interesting observation here. I think this is where the interesting issue of whether you work with a SME or trust the agents to work something out themselves, or both. This is a really, 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 really interesting one. I would say with that is you're actually working in a combination of both. You're working with, so in the case of the self-healing course, you'd be working with that SME to identify where, if changes are going to be made to content, where's the source? So it might be in a project management platform. It might be in the customer relationship management platform, and which fields, if they change, should be updated then into the core module. That will be part of how we quote unquote design a course, which really won't be a course. It'll more be a vector, or a vector database rather, for where we extract information from. So we'll need to be working that out. But for now, I would definitely say human in the loop. I would not allow an agent to just go in and make changes without a human actually looking at it. And I would never actually, even right now, trust it to touch regulatory content. That's something that I would never want to see it do, just because there just requires a lot more observation on that. So again, I'll pause for a moment, because I do want to leave enough time for questions or feedback, or anything that is coming up for you right now, because I know this is a huge change. There's probably I'm not saying probably, I know when I talk to a lot of L&D professionals, there's a feeling of grief almost, that what I did before, I'm not going to do anymore. I'm not going to be constructing learning in the way that I thought I was going to be. And I know that can be hard. There's still, though, however, as I said, there will still be person to person. We also need to think about, as learning architects, how do we orchestrate, how do we put triggers in so there is a human to human connection? When is a coach inserted into a learning pathway? And what should the coach be talking about? When might you, think of the Spanish example, when might you interact with somebody who's practicing your Spanish with you? And how does that fit into your day-to-day? These will all come down to that learning experience architect, or their learning experience orchestrator. We will need to think about where these need to happen. And if you want to go really meta, eventually we're going to have a lot of data on how well those triggers actually work, and we'll probably change those triggers based on what we see works and what we see doesn't work. But these are things that we're going to need to think about. So if it hasn't really become clear, for me, it's not about content. And I think we had the comment made above is really about context. And yes, the race right now, if we want to consider it a race, or the challenge is not building more AI generated content. We need to get those tutors right. So I need that AI tutor, or that coach, to be so finely trained that it's actually serving up really meaningful, hyper personalized, and it continuously learns how that person learns to improve. So, for example, I'm sure everybody here, I don't need to see a show of hands, has seen Dr. Philippa Hardman's Epiphany. This is exactly what we're looking at with Epiphany, and it is beautiful and it is amazing, because it's so trained on really well-designed pedagogy that's based on research and studies and data, and that is what makes it better than, say, just going to Gemini and saying, hey, can you teach me X, Y, and Z? Although, if you do follow, Google or any of those, they are all building their own learning coach type functionality as well. So it'll be interesting to see where that race goes, and how those get better and better. But to me, that's the fundamental place. So if we think of ourselves again as those learning experience architects, how do we help improve those? This will also be a part of our role. We have two comment and a question. Dr. David Love, human in the loop is vital for everything. Yes, AI outputs need to check content, of course. I wouldn't allow without it unless it was something that like I'm comfortable with, or it's coming maybe like I used to let Sven respond by himself. Well, obviously Sven, as I said, had a little bit of a technical meltdown, so I have to fix him. But yeah, it's you wouldn't do that, and I certainly wouldn't do that at an enterprise or a corporate level. Question from Michelle, curious if things that might start with a prompt, what about when we hear, I don't know where to start? Excellent question, Michelle, because you're asking exactly what we need to think about when we are building these tutors and training this tutor. I personally really believe that the tutor should actually start with you as opposed to having the white space. The tutor should be, good morning, Michelle. I see that you have a meeting with this person, here's a bit of history on them. I know that you have a challenge when you're talking about this particular product with them. So it starts to know you. It helps you know where to start. And that to me is it's such a small thing, but I actually think that's part of how we are going to train those tutors is do we start first, or does the person start? Now, from a commercial model, if you think of OpenAI and those tools, of course, they want the person to be in charge, and then they hook you in. I think we're maybe going to need to be a little bit more prescriptive in a very, very healthy way, right? Like I don't know where to start, so it's going to know it's already going to prompt you. So the AI will prompt you to get that interaction to happen. Nigel says here, I've heard a few times that people's jobs won't be replaced by AI, but they are likely to be replaced by people using it. Yes. Okay. With this in mind, would you encourage everyone in the L&D field to become expert in using AI sooner rather than later? Actually, no. I don't believe that everybody needs to be an expert in AI, and here's why. AI is such a broad term. I think there are basics. You should know how to prompt. I think that's a good place to start. But I don't believe that everyone in L&D needs to know how to build an agent, or needs to know about MCPs, or needs to know about how agentic AI works. I actually really don't believe that. What I think you need to know, though, is the possibilities of them and how you want them to operate and be architected. That's where I think it's most critical. If I had to say, what would I encourage everyone in the L&D field to become more of an expert in? I know I said above, like understanding agents, but I would also say really understanding pedagogy and understanding data. And data is one that I've said over and over and over again. And the reason that I say this is because right now, if we train our tutors on pedagogy, which is where we're starting, which is the excellent place to start, I actually have a philosophical question, which is when we start connecting the dots, remember when I did that closed loop reporting where we were getting data in real time, will we start to question some of that pedagogy? Because now we're going to have millions, if not billions, of data points to measure as to whether something is really effective. So to give you a practical example, we were always taught in e-learning to have learning objectives, and that leads to better results. Well, are we going to test that? Are we going to see how that actually works, and where we're going to be able to A/B? So having two groups that are similar, test one with learning objectives and one with not, and does that really contribute to learning outcomes? Now, I know that data can be played with. It can fool us. I can say all sorts of things about data, but I do think it's going to be interesting to see how data will maybe challenge some of the pedagogical principles that we have now. To be very clear, I don't think learning objectives are pedagogy, with a capital P, but using that as a very practical example to understand what I'm talking about. Question from Irena, a really, really good one. What about data privacy? Having AI know that much about you sounds a bit scary. I'm actually going to talk specifically to that, because that actually is going to become one of the roles that we have in L&D as that architect. And actually, I'll move to it just for the sake of keeping it sort of linear, which is we do have to be the ethical lens. Just because we can doesn't mean that we should. I'm seeing some solutions right now that are considering, okay, if I take Coursera because we talked about the Coursera and OpenAI integration, should that now go into my profile within my organization, even if I consumed it on my own laptop outside of working hours using ChatGPT on my own? Well, if it's going to give me a skills profile that's beneficial, is that good for me, or do I still want autonomy? Do I want the privacy, depending on what I'm learning on Coursera, right? It's a very fine line, and I think the people who are going to have to answer for that is well, we're going to need to be the guides as learning experience architects. I also think too that we're going to need to ask some really hard questions. There's also data privacy laws in most countries, so you do need to look at where you operate. Some countries are stricter than others. Famously, Germany, France will have more stringent AI and data privacy rules, so you need to make sure you're abiding by them. But you also too need to be the voice of the learner. There are some solutions that I see, and at times, and I'm not going to out any vendor because I don't think that's fair, but I do look at it and I say, if I were using that as an employee, am I really aware of how much is being tracked? I'm sure somewhere in a handbook I consent because I accepted a job, but does it really mean that I understand fundamentally how everything is being tracked and how it's being fed back to me, and what it actually means? An interesting question I had during a session with Microsoft where they were talking about their skills intelligence, where it actually monitors how you perform using Excel or PowerPoint, anything within the Microsoft suite, and it starts to assign metrics to how well or how proficient you are with any of those tools. And I asked about this very same question, Yusra, which is an excellent one, that was an excellent one about data privacy. And they said, well, an employee can choose to turn that off, or the company can choose to turn that off. But then the question becomes, if an employee turns it off because they don't want to be tracked, does that then downstream have a negative impact on their career progression? Because now they wouldn't be surfaced as somebody who's maybe very proficient in a particular tool. Or are they going to be denied a learning opportunity because the system doesn't know that they actually need to have more support in a certain area, or it won't be as fast? So are they fully comprehending those trade-offs? These are really big questions to consider, and how much do we give versus how much do we provide that we're given back. It's the same thing when the interwebs started. We have cookies that track us wherever we go. The price of being online is our data. But we have to think really, really critically now, because it's not just about getting data about people for to sell stuff to them. This has to do with careers. It has to do with skills. These are much, much meatier and bigger questions for us to contemplate. And Yusra says here, I've always favored the use of AI as a support. How would you propose to use AI in critical thinking opportunities? Very good question. Again, that comes down to, that would be a question for yourself as a learning experience architect. I would be looking at, when I'm teaching critical thinking, how do I train that tutor to teach critical thinking? What are the triggers that I'm going to have? How do I design that tutor to prompt back to engage with critical thinking? That's the type of thinking that we need to foster. So that would be something that we ourselves would design. And that's a really good example of how we may not design a course, but we're still designing a learning experience. I will go back, because I just want to make sure we cover a couple of things, because I did jump ahead just because it came out naturally through ethics. You've probably heard, usually this is typically in consulting agencies, they'll talk about, if I'm looking for skills or talent, I buy, build, or borrow, right? Do I hire somebody? Do I train somebody? Or do I take them from another department or get a consultant in? And now we also need to think of our entire workflows with another B, which is bought. And I didn't think of this. This is Annie Bayou at Cornerstone. And I love this because this is also an opportunity, not just for us in L&D, but your workforce in general. Already, I can guarantee, if you are in an enterprise-sized organization, there are efforts right now to be looking at all workflows and saying what aspects of those are not skills we need to teach people, but rather what would be done by an agent what would be best performed by an agent, and how do we change that process? And eventually, and we should be now, looking at ourselves in L&D, not just replicating the ADDIE model, but all the things that we do in L&D, and what will be something that is eventually done by a bot that we don't trust, but we create that bot, or we work with somebody to create that bot, to create that orchestration layer. One example, I talked about data-driven learning design. I'm now working in the process of how do we create an agent that will actually automatically surface that data that identify as critical, and then make recommendations or give insights, so that somebody doesn't have to do that manually, which is what we did before. So this is going to become very critical. So if you haven't followed Annie Bayou, I definitely would recommend that you do that. And I apologize, there's actually a spelling error. It's 2 E's in Annie. That's definitely on me. James points out here, Microsoft AI 900 had a good section on responsible use of AI, covering bias, model drift, privacy issues, how to monitor. Are there equivalent materials available from Anthropic that you can recommend? I don't go by tool because I have a little bit. I get a little worried where it's kind of like the wolves are looking after the hen house. I actually look for third-party tools that will go in and certify your models. So a company, I am not endorsing any models or vendors, but if you want to know what that looks like, one example of that is Warden AI, WARDEN.ai, and they will look at your whole reasoning process for your AI models to determine if it's covering bias, all the things that you mentioned there, model drift, and data privacy. I think we're going to see more and more of that become a standard for tools that we bring into our organization. There's going to be an expectation, because let's face it, right now in the EU, it's not a new thing. There is the AI Defensibility Act. You have to be able, if questioned, to defend how AI came to a certain response, especially when it comes to employment decisions, especially when it comes to career opportunities. You have to be able to say exactly what's happening. So I do want to make sure that we have time for also too just some blue sky questions. I mentioned ethics, so sci-fi thinking. So if we think, I'd like to end a little bit on this. If we think about buy, build, borrow, and bot, are we going to be training bots? Is that something we're going to be doing? So say, IT builds an agent, but we still have to train it on what good looks like, what it should be doing. Are they going to become virtual team members? This is going out there. Another thing too that we see is that L&D, like for example, in Google Portraits, it hasn't live yet, but they actually are creating digital clones of people. This is with all of their quirks and understands their body of knowledge and their work. So say if it were me, it would know that I have a weird Canadian accent. I have a book, The 8 Levers. It would, suck all that in, know my gestures, and you could talk to me. And I would respond just like that AI tutor. So will we be responsible for building those? Will we now become, instead of curating pathways, will we be curating these clones and helping them get disseminated into our organization? I don't know, but I'm really, really interested in it. To leave you with some tangible things, though, I have created a handout just for you to be able to see some possibilities that are happening in other industries, because I think that's extremely important. So there will be a launch of a handout for you to be able to download it. Do have a look and see. There's lots of things on there if you want to play or just see. I don't expect you to be an expert, but I'd like you to see what is actually possible. And in terms of immediate next steps, this is going to be an out there one, but if you are in an organization that has knowledge management at your company, now is the time for you to be having conversations with them. Knowledge management is kind of like the brain of the organization. It's got, it's typically holding everything that's on SharePoint and all of the slide decks and press releases and everything else within that. And they're going to become really partnered with L&D. This is a prediction of mine. And so you really want to start that relationship now, because when we think of that retrieval augmentation generation, that RAG, it's going to be, in addition to other personalization objects, it's also going to be knowledge management and your content libraries. So that's, if you just were wondering, like, where can I start? So 2 things, I've got the handout for you. And then I would also be talking to knowledge management within your organization. You'll probably find that they're struggling with the same things that you're struggling with, and there's probably going to be a lot of really good ways for you to partner with each other. So that was a lot. How are we feeling, and what questions are coming in? I see here that Edwin asks, with the shift towards using private LLMs in organizations, do you think this creates an opportunity for L&D to really leverage your skills in data pedagogy? It creates the perfect opportunity. Absolutely. That's what we should, that is exactly, if we can, that is where we should be targeting. What I don't think will be viable, but it's going to happen in short term, is we'll probably have a separate LLM that is just the tutor. And then I see those actually merging. As I was mentioning before, like when I use ChatGPT and just mentioning it, it doesn't care. It self-identifies which model I should use. It has that knowledge to do that. I think that is what will happen, that our tutor will get sucked into that. Maybe I'm using Copilot because it's probably the most common one, or Gemini. It's going to go into there, but that is going to be something that L&D is going to be responsible for. And absolutely, that's the direction. Anit, what's been happening out in the wild?
First, Laurie, I just want to say that's been a fantastic session. My brain is kind of like running with so many reflections for me personally, and I'm sure everyone else from the chat box I can see. It's been a hive of activity, so thank you everyone who kind of interacted and engaged. It seems like a really exciting time in the L&D space, and thank you for those really valuable insights, especially the bits about knowledge management. I think that's a great tangible next step, especially with the handout as well. So I know Andrew's put the handout in the chat box, so please make sure you get that to take with you. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to touch upon to keep coming back for more, everyone, for our next session. So our next session is this Thursday, 9:30 a.m. UK time. It's around, it's titled Beyond the AI Noise, the Future of Learning in an AI World, with David Wilson from the Phosphate Group. So just to give you the kind of what's coming next. Thank you so much, Laurie, again, and thank you everyone for your valuable time today.
And just before we go, there was a poll question, how are you feeling about the future of L&D? Now that I feel like I did like this avalanche, and I hope it wasn't an avalanche. I wasn't my intention. But I'm really happy to see that I actually 44% right now are sitting at thrilled, which I think is great. It's a time to embrace. Selfishly, I remember going to these types of conferences, like where I am now, 3 or 4 years ago, and just feeling like I was seeing the same thing over and over again. And I just feel like finally now is the time that we're going to really be able to do some exciting stuff. I do see 44% are cautious, and I get it. There's definitely room for that, especially when we and cautious is good, especially when we think about the things around data privacy, think about the things around ethics. And just because we can doesn't mean we should. What data are we triangulating? And we do have a few that are perplexed, but perplexed is a good place to be, because it means that there's still curiosity and there's still interest, that the future is coming. And as Andrew says here, it's almost half and half, introvert, extrovert, definitely, that we're seeing that balance between thrilled and cautious. But what I would urge you is don't be afraid. This is fun if you embrace it. The really good thing is, I talked to a friend of mine who's a doctor and using AI, and he's petrified of it, saying, I could lose lives. Nobody in L&D is going to perish because of an L&D mistake in a course. At least I hope not. But in general, no. Not saying to be reckless, but also there is room to experiment. And I think that that's a really important place. And now we have more tools to experiment with, and that's exciting.
Definitely. I think the word embrace is a lovely way to end the session today. So thank you for that kind of excellent word choice there. Thank you, everyone.